Yeah, art therapy.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of, not here, but in the university I was working in New York City, of supervising interns, both in the field and from an academic point of view. But I'm thinking your idea is kind of like the idea is something they call critical psychiatry, where they're looking at, analyzing and critiquing the role of psychiatry and the impact.
Yeah, so going deeper than just the content itself. And you're familiar with the what, so what, now what reflection model.
So for the breakout session, I have a couple of questions that I'd like everybody at the table to address. And there's a blank piece of paper on each table. Don't look at the one with all the writing on it or all the print on it yet. Just look at the blank piece of paper and choose one person to kind of take some notes, because I want this first part to be a discussion for each table to go into. The first 3 questions here that I hope you can see.
Amanda?
Uh-huh.
Clarification, please. Is it the one that says discussion?
No. The one that's just blank. There should be a blank piece of paper. Oh. I've got one. Well, just one for the note taker. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the one piece of paper will be for the designated note taker of the table. And each of these questions, if the table can just kind of go around and discuss their perspective on it, that's the idea for the first about 10 to 15 minutes. And then that final question down at the very bottom, what's your next step? That I'll kind of come back in and pose that for each person. So there's enough pieces of paper at each table, and if there's not, let me know, with some space for each person to write what their specific next step will be. So these first 3 questions, the first one that you can all discuss is, what might you already do to incorporate service activities into the courses you teach, and why? What are the benefits and challenges of this? The second question, what opportunities might you see for incorporating service partnerships into the courses you teach, and why? What would the benefits and challenges be? And what ideas do you have to increase student engagement in service, either in or outside of the classroom? So what kinds of activities would our students be most interested in? And what partnerships with community service agencies might you recommend we explore? So these are things to just kind of vocally start to discuss with the table groups. And the note taking is just so that at the very end of these 3 questions, we have a chance for the note taker to present what your table was talking about.
And 2 inside my nonprofit, to be able to step back and see what the potential really is.
I'd be
enough to see, oh, I know exactly how this could work.
I know how it would fit into the rest of the curriculum at
Yeah, I just know there's incredible potential.
Yeah,
I
would be happy to have
your Master of Divinity and Master of Arts and Theological MAAT.
Master of Arts Applied Theology.
We're all applied theology. We are already doing this because each of our students has to do a 60-hour practicum in some kind of a service. They're engaging the textbooks that we had, the class talk and discussion, and the practicum itself. But the good thing for me is, so now we're going to have some more questions that we can ask of them. How does your experience speak to the goals and objectives?
That you incorporate a formal student evaluation form where the student evaluates themselves in relation. And they do that, okay, because I ask those kinds of questions on my form.
Right.
And when they fill out the form, that informs their final reflection. So they work hand in hand.
That's a very good idea. So I'll put that in, but we only have 2 weekends.
Right, so you have to cram it all in. I
Understand.
Those are some great ideas. Anybody else? What we're already doing?
Yeah, exactly. So my interest in coming was to help me discern differences between internship and service learning, because sometimes they
cross over a little bit. We had a religious studies student, an undergraduate student, because I don't get many of those, maybe 1 or 2 a year. Instead of doing thesis, she did internship, and she created an immersion program for youth in looking at homelessness and helping the homeless. And we ended up doing, I think, a video testimonial with her, because what it turned out was that the internship, the creation of the program was more internship oriented, but the transformation for herself and what she gained from that service component was more service learning oriented. And so sometimes I find that most of our students who do internship are really doing service learning in many ways, because they have that transformational piece.
We need to talk more.
Yeah, I know. But anyway, but what I don't have right now is all of the internships. The course itself is an individual course that they register with me. And so I don't have a common
whatever they are. So I'm looking at bringing more depth to their learning on it, and Marylhurst has a partnership with Christie Care, which is on the other side of campus there, and we were approached at one point to see how can we help with their facilities, because they went through a capital campaign that has been put on hold because of the economy, and have plans to build new buildings. Not yet, because the funds have stopped coming in because I have this much money.
Not necessarily.
It's situations such as that.
You could just encourage students or require them to say, go out into
How do we feel
and stand in front of a Fred Meyer store and see how many people are
feel good about where they are when they're taking out
survey people where they don't use reusable
or not.
bags, and
So
then maybe even
we're looking at writing a course that incorporates.
go to
You want to try and make it as open-ended as possible so that students begin to use their own creativity, as to what direction they want to take, and yet balance it to students so often wanting things spelled out for them. This is like, they don't like that gray area.
Approach here, we can do internal, which is something that I do.
It was an accelerator.
International students find a buddy so that a student can actually help them in a variety of ways. One would be just conversation.
And
there are dozens of teachers that are doing the same thing. For everybody at some point, nonprofit, that tend to be working for it.
So talking with the department, we're looking at.
One course at a time, and they started it at the very intro course by identifying a project, and it could actually be in the context in which they're already working or volunteering. And then in the marketing course, in every course, actually in the executive course, they build a component of that project. So they build a budget for it, they build a training plan for it, they build a marketing plan for it, they do the needs analysis. However it was sequenced in the curriculum, and they're kind of touching on it at every point, and then they implement it, and then they evaluate it.
I just want to take a couple seconds for each table to briefly describe what they talked about, because I want to give everybody a chance to write down what their individual next step will be for service learning, because I would like to take that back with me and follow up with each of you on how I can help. So if each table can just have a representative speak to what, in general, your table was talking about, like a minute or so per table, that would be great.
Talked about a practicum in formation course that's taught in the MDiv and MAAT programs in the Divinity School, in which students already do many of the SL things that we've been talking about. But some ideas that came out for generating better questions, for example, for reflection after that experience will be incorporated in future offerings, and also adding journaling to the process, the practicum process. Susan talked about self-evaluations following SL experiences, plus using a time log in which people record the nature of activities and the time spent. Kirsten was interested in how similar some SL activities are to what her interns do, and so was thinking about how to incorporate some things from this session into internship, for example, having common courses for all interns, perhaps as a hybrid online component so that they could talk and reflect on their experiences. And Iris was thinking about internal community SL experiences, for example, between international students and and non-international students, I guess, as well as external SL, and also is looking at a book called Servant Leadership Across Cultures, which should inform the work that she's going to be doing in a course this summer.
We talked about challenges associated with service learning online, and especially in an accelerated situation. We talked about the possibility of simplifying aims and really being focused to accomplish something like that. Jess gave an example of a group of students that she had that decided to address a concern they had about recycling computers, and so they went door to door in neighborhoods and kind of did a drive and took care of that themselves. And it was suggested that that could be a cool online project for students to do. Stephen suggested the idea of the open source website kind of collaborative building together as a possible interesting thing an online class could do.
Thanks everybody for kind of helping stick to the time commitment here. I think we'll start. I just want to take a couple seconds for each table to briefly describe what they talked about, because I want to give everybody a chance to write down what their individual next step will be for service learning, because I would like to take that back with me and follow up with each of you on how I can help. So if each table can just have a representative speak to what in general your table was talking about, like a minute or so per table, that would be great.
I'll try real quick, and people can jump in. We talked about a practicum in formation course that's taught in the MDiv and MAAT programs in the Divinity School, in which students already do many of the SL things that we've been talking about, but some ideas that came out for generating better questions, for example, for reflection after that experience will be incorporated in future offerings, and also adding journaling to the process, the practicum process. Susan talked about self-evaluations following SL experiences, plus using a time log in which people record the nature of activities and the time spent. Kirsten was interested in how similar some SL activities are to what her interns do, and so was thinking about how to incorporate some things from this session into internship, for example, having common courses for all interns, perhaps as a hybrid online component so that they could talk and reflect on their experiences. And Iris was thinking about internal community SL experiences, for example, between international students and non-international students, I guess, as well as external SL, and also is looking at a book called Servant Leadership Across Cultures, which should inform the work that she's going to be doing in a course this summer.
We talked about challenges associated with service learning online, and especially in an accelerated situation. We talked about the possibility of simplifying aims and really being focused to accomplish something like that. Jess gave an example of a group of students that she had that decided to address a concern they had about recycling computers, and so they went door to door in neighborhoods and kind of did a drive and took care of that themselves. And it was suggested that that could be a cool online project for students to do. Stephen suggested the idea of the open source website kind of collaborative building together as a possible interesting thing an online class could do. Jess talked about the idea of surveys or projects conducted in the community by students, and so instead of them having an actual community partner nonprofit that they're going and volunteering time, it might look like a project where they go in front of a Fred Meyer and do a survey, how many people are using cloth bags, and have some kind of project that results in some good service-oriented thing, but they don't have that partnership. And it was discussed, the idea that students might grow in a different way if they have a chance to sort of reach their own conclusions in their own system and not join an already in progress nonprofit. And Greg added to that as with a math class where there are some students need a bit more time and work to understand certain concepts than others, so is it with service learning, that we can't assume that every student is going to be completely comfortable with everything that's asked of that person in terms of difference in outgoing nature and confidence and things like that. So, and you added one thing at the end that I didn't get. Do you want to just summarize?
Sure. I was sharing in response to the online accelerated question, a model that I learned about at the Continuums of Service conference last year, where the service project was overarching across the entire program, and they touched on it in every single course. And so, and it was a business, it was a undergraduate degree completion business. And so in the marketing course, they talked about marketing and PR. And in the finance course, they talked about developing a budget for it. And in the project planning course, they did the project plan. And I mean, there was a really cool curricular sequence to it, but it also, but they implemented it, and then they did a project evaluation, and it was all based on a community need. So it, instead of being a 5-week project, it was actually, or in this case, I think their courses were 7 weeks. It was actually like a 20-month project, but they hit on it in each class in very small ways to chunk it up. And that was just a model that I thought was pretty neat and worked for that particular program. So,
well, one of the main ones we looked at was only because there's an opportunity that I have come up, and is like how much maybe the university already has a partnership with a community member that we can go ahead and get involved with and try to incorporate that into a program. And I was looking at one for the design department that we're working on. So that is one idea that we discussed. And Diana in art therapy is looking at how do you address the clinician aspect of it, because there is special training in it. Is that right? Did I get that right?
It's 800 to 1,000 hours of service
that they're already required to do. Yeah. So how do you get that in there? I mean, and maybe it falls in line with the overarching aspect, because that requirement is then become part of service learning. Oh, yes. And Michael gave us the what, so what, and now what little handout, which is pretty much your questions that you have up there. So we found that very interesting. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and just really starting to think about what this looks like in your class, in your department, and in our university. I think we're really getting some energy going, and we have some people like Susan and Greg, and as I mentioned, some other people who are really starting to think about what this looks like here. And I kind of consider you our service learning leaders and our experts as we move forward with this. Ambassadors. John Paul. Mm-hmm. Yeah. John Paul and music, and some little things are happening that I think are significant, such as the interior design department is putting in a service learning requirement in the catalog next year. So we're really starting, baby steps, as I said before. I really, really want to take a minute to acknowledge Amanda's work. Amanda is a VISTA volunteer, and she has really been an incredible resource to Marylhurst the last year and a half, almost 2 years now. And she's, as I mentioned, she's kind of our one-on-one consultant for service learning and service partnerships. She has a database of partnerships that she's developed and is really working on the networking. So I'd like to thank her for her work in organizing this event today, and also her work in just kind of overseeing and taking leadership of the whole service program. So thank you very much, Amanda. She's placed evaluations on your table, so if you would take a minute to do the evaluations, make sure to give her the page around your next steps for service learning, and have a lovely afternoon. We really appreciate you all being here today. Thank you.